Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Spoken Greats podcast, where we take great ideas from great books. So today we're looking at Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. Now, Marshall Rosenberg was a clinical psychologist who developed a four-step process for communicating more effectively with people in a way that addresses your needs and their needs and allow you to find common ground with people who you have a disagreement with. Now, naturally, as humans, we are a collaborative species. The need for communication is present in all aspects of our life, whether that's personal relationships with our loved ones or family, with our friends, through to professional relationships, and up to the level of international relations and how countries communicate with each other. Communication is ultimately a tool for us to convey ideas, wants, needs to other people around us to achieve a desired outcome. And often when that outcome is not met, our response can be aggressive or defensive. And it leads to a breakdown in communication, i.e. our ideas are not being conveyed properly to the other person, and we are not receiving their messages either. Marshall Rosenberg here talks about what we can do to address this, and he came up ultimately with a four-step process for communicating. And this can be applied whether you're having an argument with your spouse, you're not happy with the behavior of your child, you're in an awkward dispute in the workplace and you don't know what to do, you're in law enforcement and you're trying to de-escalate a situation from ending in violence, you're a diplomat in a negotiations team, or you're a business trying to collaborate with another business. The need to be understood and the need to understand are vital in everything that we do. And every breakdown in our collaboration, cooperation, or when there's a conflict is where there's been a failure in that process. What is the four-step process? The four-step process for nonviolent communication is observation, feelings, needs, and requests. And we'll get into each of those stages during this podcast, but effectively it's summarized as follows. So with observation, you're going to make a statement on an action or behavior that someone has done without passing any judgment or evaluating on what it is that they've done or haven't done. For example, you never listened to me, or you didn't listen to me in the meeting is not an observation. That's a judgment. You're making an evaluation on someone's behavior. What you could say is, yesterday during the meeting, you did not ask me for my opinion. That would be an objective observation. That's a fact. You then move into the next stage, so feelings. You could say, that made me feel frustrated. You didn't say, you pissed me off, you don't listen. You're making it clear that it was that action in particular, the fact that you weren't asked for your opinion during the meeting, that made you feel frustrated. And now it's important with this process that you then follow up with step 3, which is your needs. Because if you just do the first two phases, observation and feelings, it will put the other person on a defensive because it makes it seem like it's their fault. So explaining your need, it explains to the other person why it is that you felt frustrated. So yesterday during the meeting, you didn't ask me for my opinion on this proposal. That made me feel frustrated because I need to feel that my contributions to this team are appreciated if I'm going to take ownership of any proposal that will be implemented. And then finally, you ask a request. Now, this has to be something concrete, something that is measurable and is feasible for the other person to do. Imagine that the request you're asking for them could be recorded on a camera. So if someone was watching back in a video, it's obvious that they have filmed it. So, for example, it can't be a negative. So you can't say, don't ignore me. It's very difficult to quantify that. And you can't say something vague like, in the next meeting, I would like you to listen to me. How do you objectively measure whether someone has listened to you? You're going to name a time and a place, and you're going to name exactly what it is that you would like the other person to do. I would like you to ask for my opinion when proposal 2 on the agenda is brought up in next Friday's meeting. You put all that together and say, yesterday during the meeting about that new proposal, you didn't ask for my opinion on it, and that made me feel frustrated because I need to feel that my contributions to this team are appreciated so that I feel involved in the decision-making process. At next week's meeting, when proposal 2 on the agenda is brought up, I would like you to ask for my opinion. So here you've now laid out in full what it is that did not meet your needs, how it made you feel, why it made you feel that way, and what it is that the other person can do to correct this. Now, if you'd gone the other route, for example, and said, yesterday you didn't listen to me, you're so selfish, I wish you'd listen to me more, it's very unlikely to produce the same outcome because it puts the other person on the defensive, and also the parameters for what you would actually like them to do next are too vague for them to meet them. And the more vague you are about what it is that you want, the less likely it is that you will get it. However, nonviolent communication is not a one-way street. It works both ways. So the system also works on the receiving end. So if a coworker comes to you and says, I've had enough, you never listen to me, you can go through the process of attempting to understand what it is that you've done, which is not meeting their needs. So even though the other person has not exercised non-violent communication here, you can respond with non-violent communication. So instead of getting defensive and being like, what do you mean? I always listen to you. You can try and understand what it is that is behind their words. So if someone's saying they've had enough, that indicates that they are frustrated. And if you're saying that you never listen to me, it indicates that they have a need to be listened to. So you can unpack that there and put it back to them. It seems that you're frustrated because you feel that you're not being listened to. And they might say something like, no one ever lets me talk in meetings, and yet I'm the one that's going to have to implement these changes. And maybe you could respond with something like, it sounds like you feel that we haven't considered what the impact might be of these changes on how you do your work. Is there something that you'd like to tell the group at the next meeting? And they might say something like, what's the point? Everyone just interrupts me and doesn't give me the chance to speak. And then you could reply something like, would you like to be invited to speak when item 2 of the agenda at the next meeting is brought up? And there you have it. You've gone through the process there of being on the receiving end of non-violent communication and how you can respond to someone else's unmet needs. This, of course, is all easier said than done because using this process takes patience and it takes a level of self-awareness which we often don't exercise, and it requires a level of emotional intelligence which is quite difficult to sustain. Now, it's not about suppressing our emotions, it's about recognizing them and what lies behind them. Ultimately, everything we do in our lives is emotional. If you look at people who have had horrific accidents where they've sustained damage to the brain and the part of the brain that deals with emotions has been suppressed, all of their decision-making capability is taken away to the point that they will just stay in bed. Even the decision to get out of bed in the morning is an emotional decision. So emotions are a huge part of everything that we do. And often they're sending a signal to us of our current circumstances. And so when we experience anger or pain, frustration, sadness, it's a signal from our body that we are not seeing our needs in the current situation met and that we would like the circumstances to change. But often we're then quite poor about communicating how we want that to change. And this is the process that nonviolent communication tries to address. So let's go a bit deeper into the 4 processes and break down more specifically how we do this. So there are a few things in observations to avoid. When you're observing what someone says or what someone does that you're not satisfied with, it's important to maintain objectivity and to demonstrate empathy. There are a few things here which are guaranteed to block empathy, and this is where you'll have a breakdown in communication and the argument will potentially escalate. So the first one, moralistic judgments. This is where you take one piece of someone's behavior and then you extrapolate that and use it as a basis for determining what or who someone is. So you may say that John is lazy or that Jessica is selfish. The problem with this kind of classification is that it doesn't address the behavior or action in question that we actually want to change. It just dismisses the entire person as this is what they are. For example, if your partner wants more attention from you than you would like, you may call them needy. And alternatively, if they want less attention from you might call them cold or aloof. Anyone who turns up to work later than you is lazy or unprofessional. And anyone that turns up to work earlier than you is a workaholic or neglecting their family. You start to see the world in terms of you are the correct point of reference for which everyone else is on a spectrum of wrongness according to how different they are to your point of reference. And these kind of classifications may sometimes influence a behavior change, but not for the reasons that you want to. Often the case is that someone may adapt their behavior out of feelings of shame or guilt or fear. This might produce a short-term change, but ultimately the person will harbour resentment towards you for making them do it and will likely revert to the previous behaviour. This all boils down to one question. Do you want to win arguments or do you want to solve problems? And you will never solve problems if you are in the space of assigning blame or wrongness to people. If you take the moralistic judgment approach, you may win an argument. You may go, I'm right, you're wrong. It will not address the problem. And it's a difficult thing to do in the moment because naturally we feel a righteousness to punishing people, to putting them back in their box and making them feel silly, making them look stupid or insulting them. But it doesn't address the key issue, which ultimately is that you want to see a change in behavior. So that's moralistic judgments. It's a blocker to empathy. The next one is making comparisons. So there's an odd expression that a man is wealthy when he earns more than his sister-in-law's husband. And there's many wise aphorisms on this, such as comparison is the thief of joy, keeping up with the Joneses, etc. It's very antagonizing when you compare yourself to other people. And it's often the case that comparison is more important than reality in terms of our perceptions. So, for example, someone who earns $1 million a year living on a street with everyone else who earns $100 million a year, they're going to feel like a loser because in comparison to everyone else in their peer group, they're 100 times poorer. And this often relative difference can be a source of unhappiness. But we can take this process a little bit further. You can pick any figure you admire from history. You could look at Mozart. You could look at someone like Alexander the Great or Julius Caesar or Leonardo da Vinci, and then just go through their Wikipedia and read the long list of achievements that these people made, and then look at your own life. It's very hard not to be depressed when comparing yourself to these people. And that's exactly the same feeling that other people have when you say, why can't you be more like so-and-so? Or this person? Helen's husband always does this for her. Why can't you behave more like your sister? Again, these comparisons are going to trigger a defensive response, and they're not going to result in the behavior change that you desire. So avoid comparison. The next step we have is denial of responsibility. We often use terminology to imply that it's outside of our control. We might use phrases such as I have to, or should, or I'm supposed to. Rosenberg makes the point that when many Nazi officers were put on trial for their crimes during World War II, often their answer was that they had to do the things that they were doing because it was superiors' orders, it was company policy, or it was the law. The reality is that we cannot be made to do anything. Anything we are doing, it is because we have chosen to do it. For example, I don't have to go to work tomorrow. I choose to go to work. Why do I choose? Because I don't want to lose my job. Why don't I want to lose my job? Because I need the money to pay for my bills. I also enjoy my job, and so that would be a bad consequence. Therefore, I choose to go to work because I want to do it. Transforming obligations to choices removes the low agency illusion that you have no control over your life. You always have a choice. It reminds me of a phrase from Marco Pierre White when asked about making Gordon Ramsay cry. He said, I did not make Gordon Ramsay cry. He made himself cry. That was his choice. If we don't take responsibility for how we act, think, or feel, then we will ultimately be unable to empathize with others or acknowledge our own part in failing to meet the needs of others. So how can we make more objective observations without evaluating? So we need to be more specific in our language. So we can look at, for example, avoiding phrases such as always or never or frequently or rarely. These tend to exaggerate someone's behavior. Ultimately, you're categorizing everything they do rather than focusing specifically on a certain instance. For example, you never do what I want. That's an evaluation. An observation of that would be, the last 3 times I've asked you to do something, you said no. You're working too much. That's an evaluation versus the last 3 times we had plans on a Saturday, you cancelled them to work overtime. My father was a generous man versus for the past 20 years, my father donated 10% of his salary to charity. You're pointing out a specific thing which can be quantified and isn't subjective. This is the critical part to making an observation which doesn't add any of these empathy blocking aspects such as moralistic judgments or comparisons or denial of responsibility. So let's look at how we can clarify our feelings, be more specific about how we feel. So in the book, Marshall makes the point that quite often, at least in the English language, we have a tendency to use the word feel when we really mean think. This is particularly the case when we say things like, I feel like, or I feel that. What we're really saying is, I think. And this is not how we are actually feeling. This is a thought we have. So if I say, for example, I feel like a loser, feeling like a loser is not an actual feeling. Feeling disappointment or feeling frustration certainly is a feeling. So you have to translate here to what it is behind thought that you're actually feeling. So in the case of I feel like a loser, more likely you're feeling frustrated with the progress that you're making in a certain aspect of your life. Or let's say you say to your partner that you feel neglected. You cannot feel what someone is not doing. What it is here is that you're feeling loneliness. So being able to go beyond that first layer of your thoughts and interpret what it is that you actually feel is important for expressing yourself appropriately to resolve a conflict. He gives another expression here of the difference between expressing our feelings and describing what we think we are. So he gives the example of, I feel inadequate as a guitar player. You're assessing your ability to play the guitar rather than expressing your feelings. Perhaps you're maybe feeling impatient with yourself as a guitar player because you were hoping to learn the guitar much quicker and it's taken a lot more time than you thought. But feeling inadequate in itself is not an emotional state. Expressions such as abandoned, attacked, betrayed, intimidated, rejected, taken for granted, pressured, these imply something that someone else is doing to you or your interpretation of what you think it is that they are doing to you. It does not actually translate to what you are feeling. You're thinking about how others are behaving towards you. Now, I will share the link to this in the description because there's a very long list of emotions here which can be used to describe how you're feeling. I might just pick out a few here. So this is when your needs are being met. Affectionate, amused, animated, complacent, concerned, inquisitive, inspired, sensitive, thankful, trusting, upbeat, loving, jubilant, joyous, encouraged. And on the other side, when our needs are not being met, afraid, aggravated, broken-hearted, cross, dejected, depressed, embarrassed, exasperated, fidgety, forlorn, frightened, frustrated, lethargic, lonely, miserable, panicky, overwhelmed, reluctant, shaky. I'll put the full list in the description. The intent really here is to enrich your vocabulary so that you can better describe how it is that you're feeling. Once you have a better understanding of how it is that you feel, you can then interpret what is the need behind that feeling, which you will never get to if you're simply operating on the level of I feel good or I feel bad. So now that we've addressed some of the ways to express your feelings, let's talk about how to take responsibility for our feelings. So When you hear a negative message, when someone is criticizing you, there are 4 ways that you can take this message. So let's say, for example, someone is angry at you and they say, "You're the most self-centered person I've ever met." The first response is you could blame yourself. So you could say, "You're right, I should be more sensitive." This is where the person has made us to feel bad or guilty. And so we've guilted ourselves into a position of accepting the blame. When we do this, this can have an impact on our long-term self-esteem as we are implementing people's criticisms personally into our identity. The second response is to blame the other person. So you may say, "You have no right to say that. I'm always considering your needs. You're the one who's really self-centered." So we're likely feeling anger when this happens, and it might feel good in the moment to immediately fire back at the other person, the accusation that they're throwing at us. But clearly this leads to a breakdown in communication. So the third way is to sense what our own feelings and needs are in this situation. So he gives the example here of saying, "When I hear you say that I am the most self-centered person you've ever met, I feel hurt because I need some recognition of my efforts to be considerate of your preferences." So here we've diffused the criticism a bit because we've focused on why it is that we feel negatively about what it is that they've said instead of trying to fire it back directly at them. And then the fourth way, the most empathetic way, is to sense the other's feelings and needs. So focus on why it is that the other person has said what they've said to you. So you might ask the question, are you feeling hurt because you need more consideration for your preferences? So by doing this, we accept responsibility for our feelings, which then gives us more ownership of the situation. So for example, he gives an example here of, "You disappointed me by not coming over last evening." And then alternatively saying it is, "I was disappointed when you didn't come over because I wanted to talk over some things that were bothering me." In the second example, you're tracing your feeling to a clear, unfulfilled desire. Whereas in the first one, you're putting the responsibility purely on the other person, which is more likely to trigger a defensive response from them. So one of the best ways of doing this is to pair "I feel" with "because." So I'm feeling angry because I want to be treated with respect. I feel irritated when there's spelling mistakes in the document because I want the company to appear professional. I feel agitated when I'm stuck in traffic because I want to get home and see my family. So this enables us to connect our feelings to our needs. And it's important that we do this because it's not enough to just communicate how we're feeling. So if a wife communicates to her husband that she feels upset that he is working too much, and then he interprets that as, she thinks I'm spending too much time at work and she wants me to spend less time at work. And then he goes ahead and books a golf tournament, and the wife is still frustrated because obviously what she meant was not that he's working too much, it's rather that she wanted to spend more time with him. But not communicating that need clearly and specifically to the other person is going to be a great source of resentment when they don't meet that need for you. There are lots of different needs that we may have, and Marshall points out some of the basic human needs that we all share. Interestingly, it's loosely based off Manfred Max Neef's fundamental human needs. Now, you may be more familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, a sort of pyramid of our needs, this idea that you have your basic survival needs at the lower levels, and then your needs for love and higher purpose at the upper end of the pyramid. An interesting criticism of the Maslow hierarchy of needs is the idea that you need to progress up the pyramid before you have other needs addressed. Whereas in the matrix of needs and satisfiers from Manfred Max Neves, all of the needs are complementary and can occur simultaneously rather than consequentially. And I suspect there's probably some wisdom in this, in that, for example, someone can not have their material needs met, but they still have a need for respect, or they still have a need for understanding or trust, even though some of their other survival needs aren't currently being met. But here are some of the categories that Marshall lays out here. So you have autonomy. This is the need to choose one's goals or dreams. Celebrations, being able to celebrate dreams being fulfilled, or also commemorating losses of loved ones. This is mourning, effectively. Integrity. So this is self-worth, meaning, authenticity. Interdependence. So this is acceptance, appreciation, contribution, emotional safety, honesty, respect, love, understanding. Play. So this is the need for fun, laughter. Spiritual communion, beauty, harmony, inspiration. And then you have the basic physical nurturance, so air, food, movement, protection, sexual expression, shelter, touch, water, etc. There's a variety of needs here. So we're going to move on to how those needs can be met. And this is through requests. Requests need to imply positive action. So you can't tell someone not to do something because they will focus on the avoidance of the negative rather than the pursuit of the positive. So going back to the example of the wife asking the husband not to work as often, he complied with the request. He went golfing instead. That doesn't satisfy her need for intimacy or quality time together. And really, the best response should have been that she asked him to spend at least one evening a week with her. That's a positive request that he can meet. Very often we focus so much on what we don't want, but then what it is that we actually do want. And just presenting someone with the things that you don't like, it doesn't offer them a path for satisfying your needs. It just tells them what not to do. When you say to someone, I want you to be professional, what are you talking about? What is it that you actually want them to do? Whereas if you say, I would like you to arrive before 9 o'clock every day, that is a specific measurable request that they can aim for. Think of it like the process of cleaning a house. It's a series of tasks aggregated together to constitute the idea that the house is clean and tidy. And if you have a different idea of what constitutes tidy or clean to someone else, then you need to be more specific. For example, I need you to pick up your clothes off the floor and put them in the laundry basket. Or I need you to wash your dishes after using them and put them in the dry rack. Now, with something as mundane as tidying the house, it might be quite easy to do. But when it comes to more emotive issues, such as our relationships or heated topics in the workplace, it might get a more daunting prospect. Because, first of all, we've probably not had that conversation with ourselves and asked ourselves, why am I feeling the way I'm feeling? What is it that I actually want from this situation? Second of all, we're scared that our needs might not be met or that we're embarrassed to articulate them. And this is why we're deliberately vague. This is also true in goal setting. We might be deliberately vague about a goal so that we're not committing ourselves fully to it. And so we have no fear of failure. So you could say something like, I would like to learn French one day. That's a vague wish. Versus, I want to be able to order food in a restaurant on my next holiday to France in September. You then have a clear metric for success or failure. And we don't like to do this because we fear failure ultimately. And there's always the possibility that when we communicate clearly to people what it is that we want, that they won't fulfill it. But the problem with not communicating it is that they're not fulfilling it anyway. So what do you have to lose from just communicating honestly about what it is that you want? Now, it's important to note that all human relationships are based on give or take, and this process of non-violent communication is not just a way of getting everything that you want. When you make a request to someone, they obviously have a choice in whether they decide to comply with it or not. And they may have their reasons for not acting in the way that you want them to. This is the key difference between a request and a demand, is how you respond accordingly. If when they decline to act the way that you have requested, you turn hostile, you criticize them, then what you made originally was not a request, it was a demand. And the thing with a demand is there's kind of two ways that someone can respond to it. They can rebel, they can say, fuck you, I'm not doing it, and we all know where that goes. Or they can submit to it, and they will do something begrudgingly out of guilt, shame, or fear of consequences. And you may feel, so what if they're doing it, who cares? But you have to ask yourself the question of, what is it that you want someone to do? And secondly, what is the reason that you want them to do it for? Are you interested in bringing about a genuine change? So someone wants to do something, or are you merely interested in forcing someone to do something? In terms of interpersonal relations, obviously the latter is going to be much more detrimental to our interactions with people. And the hope is that we can inspire change which meets our needs in some way without violating their needs. And we can find some common ground in the middle. So for example, you could ask a friend if they want to hang out today, and they explain to you that they are tired. Now, if you to turn hostile on this, then your original request was not a request, it was a demand. And in making that demand, you've not shown empathy for their needs. They need rest at the minute, and maybe they want to hang out another time. And would you rather spend time with someone who is doing so because they want to, or because they feel like they have to do something? Part of the process of making a clear request to someone is ensuring that they understand. And it's quite often the case that someone may not interpret something the way that we intended it to. An exercise you can do here is to ask them to repeat back what they think you just said. Now, it's important if they respond with something which doesn't match your interpretation, that you don't go on the offensive with, that's not what I said, or you didn't understand. Here, Marshall recommends approaching it empathetically, first of all by thanking them for repeating what it is that you'd said, and then stating that you didn't make yourself as clear as you'd like to, so maybe you can explain it a bit more clearly. This diffuses the situation from someone could, for example, go on a defensive and say, do you think I'm deaf, or do you think I'm stupid? But that's not the intent here. The intent is to make sure that there is a mutual understanding of what it is that you're asking for. We often operate on assumptions, and this is where the biggest breakdown in communication occurs. We assume that the other person is interpreting the world as we do, and that they understand things from our perspective. This is very rarely the case without clear and effective communication. So when it comes to understanding the needs of others, we need to exercise empathy. And there's a few things critical in this which may block that empathy from occurring. So when someone confides in us and shares something unfortunate that has happened to them, these are a few things that can block that communication. So one-upmanship. They say that, oh, my grandma died. And then you say, oh, that's nothing, both my parents are dead. Immediately, they're going to switch off. The fact that you may have experienced something worse at some point has nothing to do with how someone feels currently now. Ben Shapiro is famous for saying, facts don't care about your feelings. Feelings don't care about your facts. And one-upmanship will immediately shut down someone's communication with you. The next one is advice. So unsolicited advice. If you just say, if I was you, I'd go see a therapist. If someone hasn't asked for advice, it may make them feel like you are dismissing their issue and they're just oversimplifying it with an easy solution. This is the same with educating or consoling. Oh, you poor thing. This can make the person feel patronized. And again, like you're not really being understood. Often the case when someone is expressing dissatisfaction, they're not seeking sympathy. They just want someone to listen to them. Shutting someone down or downplaying something. So, it's not that bad, get over it, or look on the bright side. Again, this doesn't acknowledge the person's experience. Also, interrogating as if you are a therapist, cross-examining them. And when did this start happening? Is another surefire way to make people feel that they're not being listened to or understood. So how can we demonstrate empathy to someone when they are opening up to us in this way? We can attempt to paraphrase to ascertain whether we actually understand the person's feelings. So if your girlfriend says, oh, I feel ugly when looking in the mirror, if you're to just merely reply, oh, you're beautiful, honey, that's being dismissive of her feelings. You can instead reply with, are you feeling disappointed with your appearance today? You're paraphrasing what she said and attempting to understand how her feelings are. There's a tendency when someone presents us with a problem to look at solving it. Most people know what they need to do in most circumstances, so we very rarely need actual advice on emotional states because we've already made our mind up. We're just looking for someone to listen to us. This reminds me of Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss, who was a FBI hostage negotiator. Quite common tactic he would use when communicating with hostage takers is he would repeat the last three words that they said. The last three words that they said? Yeah, the last three words that they said. What it does is it triggers the other person to elaborate on what it is they're saying. And it confirms an element of understanding whilst also showing that you want to understand. Reflecting back what a person is saying to you, or paraphrasing it and confirming that you've understood it correctly, is a very effective tool for diffusing a situation. Because often when someone is emotionally charged, it's because they are desperately trying to send a message that their needs are not being met. So if someone says to you, "You never listen," you could say, "It sounds like you're frustrated because you would like me to show that I understand what you say to me." So we've addressed this process of communicating with people in a more non-violent manner, both actively to communicate our needs and receiving as well to understand the needs of someone else. But what if I told you can actually communicate non-violently with yourself? So in the final part of the book, Marshall talks about how to use non-violent communication with ourselves. We're often our own harshest critic. When we make a mistake, we're like, how could I have been so stupid? When we're angry at ourselves, it's important to reflect on what is the need that we have failed to meet for ourselves. So when we make a mistake, was it our need to feel organized, or was it our need to appear competent to others that wasn't met? Once we acknowledge what is the feeling that we are having and what is the need behind that feeling that we haven't met, we can then address future actions. And we can use this process as a sort of post-mortem on our past. We can look at things which didn't go so well in the past, or things that we regret. And then we can evaluate, why is it that we regret those things? What need is it that we didn't manage to meet in that scenario? And what can we do next time concretely to better meet our needs? Also looking at our life and looking at the things that we may not enjoy doing and asking ourselves, why is it that we are doing this thing? What need is it that we are trying to fulfill? Can give us purpose about what direction we're actually taking. Remembered by Rolf Potts in his book Vagabonding, cites a scene from, I think it was Wall Street, where Charlie Sheen's character, he's talking to a girl about, he's working all these hours as a stockbroker in order to one day have enough money to go motorbiking across China. And then Rolf Potts points out that he could have just worked a minimum wage job cleaning toilets and would have had enough money to ride a motorbike across China. Having a question about what is it that you actually need in the process is a useful tool for determining why you're doing the things that you're doing. If, for example, you hate your current job and you just say, I have to go to my job. You don't have to go to it. You're choosing to go to it. Why are you choosing to go to it? Because you need the money. Why do you need the money? What do you need the money for? Because my salary pays X and my car payment is Y. Why do you need that car? I don't need the car. So actually I could trade this car in and I wouldn't have to work this job I hate to pay for this car I don't need. Yeah, you could. You can repeat this process with any story that you're telling yourself about why you have to do things. And you can translate it to, I choose to do this thing because of X or because of Y. I think we'll leave that there for today. Thank you for listening to the Spoken Greats podcast. If you enjoyed that episode, please like and subscribe to the channel. Be sure to check out my blog at spokengreats.com and look forward to future episodes with more great ideas from great books. See you soon.